Hello, everybody. Webinar time. Welcome once again. Great to have you all here for this, I don't know, overview, scan of life in Strata. I'm Chris Irons, Director of Strata Solve. That's stratasolve.com.au, virtually alongside, as per always, Frank Higginson, partner and industry expert, partner of Hines Legal, gosh, I can't speak today, and industry expert of some renown, Frank, welcome.
Hello, Chris. Hello, everyone. We've gone the dark close today.
Mm.
Without our chakras are in sync, mate.
In sync chakras. Just a wee bit of housekeeping for everybody. If you are new to the show, we live stream to YouTube and Facebook every Thursday at 2 o'clock Brisbane time. So to follow us on Facebook, go to Hines Legal page and hit the like button and icon. And on YouTube, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. If you do have a question, by all means, chuck it into the live chat today. We are totally into questions during live chat. Last couple of weeks, we've had a stack, actually. And it's really good just for keeping us on our toes and getting us thinking about stuff that we might not have thought about otherwise, which in turn helps you. So please do that. But if your query is a bit more involved, please put your information into the form that will show up in the comments shortly. Fill in all your details there and someone will get back to you. Today, Frank, we're going to go quirky.
Yes, but quirky but important. I think if AGM quirks. So I think like in theory, running an AGM should be easy. Should just drift along, cruise along. We've got a whole bunch of yes, no's, abstains. But for me, and I suppose for both of us again, mate, this is where we get potentially a lot of our business because things do go awry in plenty of bodies corporates, and it's always those left field things. So today I think is about some of the common things that are or might happen in your particular building and what you can do with them and some war stories. Some I mean, I don't know how many times over the years I've had clients approach me about, can you come to the AGM? And dead set, the vast majority of time, I'd say more than 90% of the time, if I go, and Chris, you're now in this boat as well, it's the clients are warning you and saying it's going to get bad, you're going to get abused, people will be throwing stones and calling names and all that sort of stuff. And you appear and nothing happens.
Yeah.
So for me, usually, I say to clients, it's a waste of time. But then for the other 10%, it is absolutely vital that you're there. And I suppose it's not to say that you can't challenge AGM decision making, because you can. And that's what the Commissioner's Office, there's a 3-month window to do that. Usually you can do that pretty quickly after the event. But sometimes if you can nip things in the bud on the day at the time, it might save a whole bunch of pain after the event.
Absolutely. And in fact, the onus is upon you to do that if you do need to challenge it later on. As you say, Frank, the vast majority of AGMs are pretty uneventful things. That's assuming people actually show up and vote anyway. Unlike a federal election, you are not compelled to vote in a bloody corporate. There's the first quirk of the day. So, yeah. But as you say, Frank, when it does go wrong, it goes wrong in various ways. We're going to focus on some of the more uncommon things, some of the things that you might think to yourself, I never knew that, I wasn't aware of that kind of stuff. We see it all the time in the corporate world, don't we, Frank, when you have big firms like BHP and all of the big companies who do their AGM. That is typically where things go wrong. You know, and sometimes you see it on the news, don't you? There was some shareholder going a bit rogue on the floor, or an overthrow.
A chance for grandstanding. Like previously, you can fire as many emails and letters as you want, but on the day when the board's up there in front of you, and I suppose we're going to have the body corporate parallel of the committees up there in front of you, and you haven't yet been heard in terms of what you've been whinging about for the last 6 months, there's your chance.
Yep.
That's so it happens at every level of, I suppose, corporate decision making, you'd say, or corporate accountability, because that's really what an AGM is, isn't it? Decision making and also potentially what has been happening.
And look, the reality of the situation is there is a huge potential for something to go wrong with an AGM. And the reason why is there's so many moving parts to it. So the more obligations you have around a process, the more chance it's going to go wrong, usually inadvertently. And some of the things we're going to talk about today are very much in that category. Well, let's kick it off then, Frank. Let's talk about committee elections. I suppose some of
Now,
this
elections.
is... What did I say?
No, you said elections, and I was going to say elections is the important thing here. When you've got a choice.
You do. So I think 101, Frank, we're talking here about circumstances when there is more nominees than positions free.
Yep.
Absolutely. So what that means in AGM is that right up until the very last item on the agenda, it is always the last item on the agenda, the committee nominations and elections. Right up until that point, the existing committee is the committee, and they're the ones that are in place. I guess the other thing to note there, Frank, it's effectively the case, isn't it, that at that point that the last agenda item rocks around, all the committee positions are spilt at that stage.
Absolutely. So your role as a committee member, or anyone's role as a committee member, is only good for 12 months. So but you get through all of the agenda items, we're now at committee voting, it's open. So no one's there, and we've got what we've got. And so if you've nominated before the end of the financial year and there's no other people competing for that particular position, you're on. And the election bit, I suppose, and this is what we're talking about today, is if there are more than one nomination for chairperson, there could be 3 or 4, who knows, more than likely to be 2 or for different roles, then there is an election for those things.
That's right. And I suppose the next quirk to talk about here is that it's certainly not a fait accompli that if you nominate, you get on to the committee. I know, Frank, we've certainly come across clients in our time people generally who think, well, I'm this, that, and the other. I nominate, therefore I must get on the committee. It's never, ever quite that simple, is it?
No. And I suppose if you want to be a bit strategic about it and get on, what you got to do is nominate for more than one position. So you nominate for chair, secretary, treasurer, and ordinary member. And if you get the thing you want, you can then withdraw your nominations from the later ones. But if you only nominate for one spot and there's a competing nomination, and that person gets the votes, you're potentially done, subject to, I suppose, Chris, the new regulation modules, which we'll talk about at the end of this. So the other thing that I think is a common question is you can get more than one executive role. So you can be chairperson, secretary, and treasurer of the one body corporate. There's always going to be 4 ordinary positions available, but one person, you can't hold more than one ordinary position, but one person can hold one executive position. And Chris, there you go. Question without notice. Does that give you 3 votes at committee level?
No.
Correct. So that's a committee of 5 votes. Sorry, I didn't mean to ambush you, mate.
No, I have to really think about that.
Yeah, so this is the stuff. This is why, and the quirks of these things. The legislation is enormous, and so you might have dealt with that 6 months ago, but you've filled your brain with the other questions that have popped up between now and then.
That issue about one person holding the 3 exec positions comes up all the time, and people generally get pretty outraged when they hear that that's the case. How dare they? And why was that? Well, it's just a function of numbers, basically. And if you want to compare it to politics, you can have a prime minister who holds other positions in the cabinet. That happens. No, it doesn't happen all the time, but it happens. In state politics, it happens, though, definitely. The Premier generally holds at least 1, possibly 2 other portfolio responsibilities. I think our Queensland Premier holds responsibilities for the arts and possibly Olympics.
Definitely the Olympics.
Yeah. Well, yes. Sorry, obviously. But yeah, so I suppose the point being, Frank, if you can have that in politics, what's wrong with having that in body corporate? That's what the problem is there.
That's a good parallel.
Yeah. As you said before, as you alluded to, Frank, something changed on the 1st of March last year in relation to committee nominations, didn't it?
Yeah, and you could argue this was previously the case under the previous regulation modules, but this is now black and white. There's no argument at all. So if a body corporate hasn't filled all of the committee positions, so we've got our 3 executive roles and our 4 ordinaries, it must call from the floor of the meeting for further nominations in relation to the positions that haven't filled. So if we've got a chairperson and a secretary and we don't have a treasurer, and we've got 2 ordinary members and missing 2, so effectively we've got a committee of 4, which is fine. That's more than the minimum number of 3. What must happen is that committee must say, okay, we have 2 ordinary spots available. Who wants them? Then if there's resounding silence, then you kick on and you've got only the 2 you've got, and the same with the executive position. But there must be a conscious effort to try to fill those spots. And I suppose the gap that we decided they were filling at the time is there are people that don't own units that might not have had the ability to nominate at the end of the financial year, and the body corporate general meeting's 3 months after that. So there's people that are interested enough to show up that didn't have the chance to do it, so they should be invited to participate. It's all about encouraging participation, this stuff, isn't it?
Absolutely, Frank. So I think the learning there, the quirk there, is that if you see all the nominations come in for committee and you go, right, thank God Mabel from number 1 didn't put her hand up because she's a lunatic, not so fast. Mabel can still get on at the AGM. She can just turn on up, and from the floor, she can get there.
People can withdraw their nominations before they're elected or on the day, or decide, I don't want to work with that Chris Irons. I don't like him at all. I'm not doing this. And suddenly there's a spot available.
Yep. And of course, the final quirk, and one of my favourite Strata quirks of all, Frank, if there are tied votes for a committee position, what happens then?
A method of chance determined by the meeting. So this is good fun when you actually, I suppose you go back to the times when it is value for you to be at meetings. I had one of these at Emporium Hotel, upstairs, conference room. We had 3 people running for 1 committee role. It was an executive position. I cannot remember what it was. Probably chairperson. That's normally what people fight over. Equal votes from all of the owners. So we're like 10 votes each. It's like, okay, method of chance determined by the meeting, unless someone wants to withdraw, and no one wanted to withdraw. So I ran downstairs.
In that situation, would you?
No, I'm holding my ground. So I ran downstairs. I got a drip straw. I cut it into a third, and then halved the last third, and walked back upstairs and said, gentlemen, because it was 3 blokes, the short straw gets the gig. Pluck no. Well, then you're it, mate. So that. Yeah, and of course, before I ran down and did that, I said, this is what I'm proposing to do. And everyone said, that's fine, because at that stage, the energy of the meeting had been exhausted because there'd been a bit of other stuff going on. So it was really quite funny.
But yeah, I think that's a great quirk, that one. So that's democracy for you in action. A couple of questions there. We will get to those shortly. We'll keep going, though. The next category of quirk, I guess, Frank, comes under the general heading of debate, discussion, and general business. Now, here's a quirk that I think surprises, shocks, and quite frankly offends some people. There's no such thing as general business, is there, Frank?
No. As much as lots of people put it on the agenda as the very last item after committee elections, like you'll see a formal general business, but there's no statutory basis for that at all. No ifs, no buts, no maybes. And in theory, like a general meeting isn't there. And I suppose this is a little bit grey and can come about it 2 different ways. A general meeting's not there to discuss. A general meeting's there to make decisions. Yep. So discussion happens before the meeting. Discussion happens before you set up the agenda motions. It doesn't happen on the day, because discussion, in a sense, disenfranchises or doesn't include the people that can't actually get there that might have otherwise voted. So in a sense, every AGM should be, and the best way to do them is if now that we're doing them electronically, it's a little bit easier. So hopefully there's a whole bunch of people voted electronically. For those people who want to vote from the floor, does anyone want to abstain? Does anyone want to vote no? Anyone? I'm going to assume then everyone else is voting yes. If you're not going to do that, let me know. Tick. Done. Next. Run through it. So it should happen.
Now, I know that, Frank, when I've done some seminars in the past and I've said that a good AGM should be over in 10 minutes, there were a number of people very irritated with that proposal. And so I've tempered that language a bit over the years. But really, it should be, shouldn't it? I mean, it should. Yeah.
And I think probably most body corporate managers would agree with you and hope in their deepest little quiet part of their hearts hope that is the case, as much as they probably can't say it publicly. But in a legal sense, that's what should happen. So it really, and this is, I suppose, part of the art of being a chairperson, is again, you've got to take the temperature of the room and the temperature of the meeting and all that sort of stuff. And so when we've been giving advice to bodies corporates, particularly with contested issues, and particularly where people might want to talk to motions. So again, there's absolutely nothing in the legislation about I put a motion up, I want to talk to it. You might see that in ancient English history and whatever it might be, but there's certainly no scope for that under strata legislation. But if you're a chairperson and you want to be seen to be fair and you want to sort of take away criticism in terms of just steamrolling motions through, you might say, okay, Chris, you put up a motion about changing the balustrading. I'll give you 3 minutes to talk to it, and then I will give someone who doesn't support your position 3 minutes to talk against it. Are you okay with that? And that's what might happen. And keep it very tight timeframes, like you might be in debating, little ding the bell on the desk and away you go. No obligation to do that, but that's probably a balanced way to do it that takes away some of the accusations of I wasn't heard.
That's right, and we get that for some buildings, particularly for very large buildings, there would be, or not even that, there would be some people who would see the AGMs perhaps their only real opportunity to meet other owners and talk with other owners. We know of some places where people will fly interstate routinely or fly intrastate for that matter to attend the AGM, and it's a big deal, and there would be an expectation for those people that there would be a modicum of discussion. So this is your point about taking the temperature, Frank. If you know that's how things are at the building, I think as a chairperson, it's probably in your best interest to be making sure there's some scope for some discussion, but it's about structured discussion, timed, organised discussion.
Setting the ground rules.
Free for all yak, no.
Yeah, ground rules. This is the basis on which people are going to speak, that is going to apply to everyone. And it must, and even like we still do at seminars, mate. It's like, okay, we want questions from the audience, not statements. So give us your question, because there's plenty of people out there with them and you need Chris and Frank to be able to get through them. So we're not going to hear 5 minutes of a ramble, get to the point. Same sort of thing in reverse at an AGM, isn't it? You don't want to hold people up for hours and hours. And again, the joys of the volunteer world in which Strata lives is that some people are good at running meetings and some aren't. So
it's an art, Frank, a skill
an art.
To be learnt. And it follows, therefore, that if you're having general business after the election of the committee, great. If that turns into a social event, great. But there's no decisions to be made there. Nothing that occurs at general business means anything from a formal sense, does it, Frank?
No. So it might, as a committee, new committee might say, okay, we'll put that on the agenda for the next committee meeting, let you know.
But if you go to general business with an expectation of deciding upon something, and something actually happens that way, that's not the way to do it, everybody. Let's move on to our next category, which will take up a bulk of the time, about agenda and motions. So the big one, not the big one, but the basic one there, Frank, you can't unilaterally change or add motions at an AGM, can you?
No, and there's an argument you can't withdraw them either. And not that you wouldn't necessarily need to have this fight today, but in theory, there's an argument that once a motion's on the agenda, it belongs to the meeting, not the proposer.
Yeah.
So as much as you do see them withdrawn fairly regularly, particularly, things might have resolved themselves or clients don't want to push the issue anymore or whatever it might be. But yeah, it's there, it's static, it's in writing, it's given everyone 21 days notice to look at it, to talk about it, to think about it, to make decisions on it. So the legislation's pretty strict about making changes to things on the day that change what has gone out to owners, because everyone's got to have notice of what it is that's being decided.
That's right. So, however, Frank, there is, and this is a quirk that might surprise some people, there is some scope to make some changes to motions on an agenda, aren't there?
There are. So probably two things. You can change a motion provided it doesn't change the subject matter of the motion. So that's obviously a fairly wide subjective thing. So what's the subject matter of a motion? We want to, I'll go off the grid. So we want to have a bylaw that allows people to keep 2 dogs and 3 cats, and we want to bring it back to just keep 1 dog. To me, it's fairly substantial part, although it still is arguably a pet bylaw. So, but interestingly enough, to actually change a motion at an AGM still requires the people on the day to make a decision to do that. And the way that's decided is more of the people need to vote for that change than against it. But anyone who has previously voted that isn't there on the day is deemed to vote no to the change.
Yeah.
So if there's 20 people that have voted electronically or by post and there's only 10 people on the floor, those 20s, the 20 are automatically no to any change. So the agenda is very static. Of course, you've got a whole lot of people there in person, then it might be a different story.
We're going to put up the link to that section of the legislation so you can have a read of that yourself. The next circumstance in which a motion could be changed at an AGM, even though we said that it can't be, these are the circumstances where it can, is in relation to, of all things, the budget, Frank.
10% up or down. And that doesn't have that same restriction about people that have voted electronically are deemed to vote no. People there on the day can do that. So, and again, a body corporate's not a creature that has discretionary spending, doesn't go on holidays, doesn't buy flowers for its spouse because it did something wrong the week before. There's a bunch of contracted statutory expenses. So, I don't know, an example might be that we've got our repair and maintenance down as 15 grand for the year. Maybe we should add a bit more. Maybe we'll make that 16 and a half. So there's another $1,500 that's raised over the course of a year from.
Here's a question for you then, Frank. What about a motion? Just picking up on that point. What about a motion that's a quote for works, and then at the meeting, the chairperson goes, "Look, since the agenda went out only a couple of days ago, the contractor came back and said the availability of materials for that quote has gone completely pear-shaped around the world. We can still do it, but it's now going to be this much extra." And it's within 10%, for argument's sake. What do we reckon about that?
I reckon that's fine if we change it from the floor. So I suppose where I'd get to with that one is I'd look at characterising the works as being, so again, inside the adjudicators' minds, to my mind, and you'd know more about this than I would, Chris, but the Commissioner's office, I think you've got to start with what the body corporate statutory obligations actually are. So if this is a discretionary spend, I think it's different from something that's a statutory obligation spend. So we might be going with a different level of paint. I don't know, different paints. We're going from whitewash to acrylic or something. Yep. That to me is different from replacing a roof. So if we're putting a roof up and tin, aluminium, whatever has gone through the roof, pardon the pun, then I think changing the budget in relation to the roof repairs is a lot more defensible than changing the budget in relation to the type of paint in those circumstances.
Yeah, it is, Frank. Yeah, it's that relatively subjective decision between procedural and substantial. We've got a few questions banking up there. We really want to get to those. So really, really quickly, we're going to get to the final kind of change at an AGM, and that's 4 motions out of order. And this isn't really so much a change. This is a complete elimination of a motion.
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose it's a quirk in the sense of, and probably for me, you look at all of the individual committee roles, there's really not much difference between them all, but this is one where the chairperson has a very special right and actually, in fact, a statutory obligation to rule motions out of order if they conflict with the Act, the regulation module, the bylaws, or they're unlawful or unenforceable for another reason. So that can be one where the chairperson or the body corporate's given the proposer of the motion plenty of notice, or it can be, and this is more than often than not what happens, the person finds out their motion's about to get ruled out of order 3/4 of the way through the meeting when it gets to motion 13. And so then from there, chairperson must explain why. And now that must be recorded in the minutes, which is in addition to the new regulation modules that arrived 2 years ago. And the final quirk is that is not the ultimate end of the matter, because the chairperson must then explain to owners what they can do to overturn the chairperson's decision. So I'm ruling this out of order. I think it's unlawful because of this. Here's my legal advice. People on the floor can then say, no, chairperson, we disagree with you. And if more from the floor vote to overturn that resolution or that decision, it must be voted on. So that can be a game of chess. And I think probably My favourite story on this one is you can't use proxies to vote on a whole bunch of motions, but you can use proxies to vote on procedural issues. And ruling a motion out of order is a procedural issue. So again, back to those 5% times that it is worth going to a general meeting. Went to one, we knew the chairperson was going to rule our motion out of order. We went and pocketed a whole bunch of proxies before we went to the meeting. Chairperson did exactly what we thought they were going to do and did say the right thing in terms of, well, you can overturn it if you want. We only had a few people on the floor, but then we said, oh, and by the way, here's all the proxies we've got, and ran him over, which was actually really, really fun. So, so yeah, you can be a bit strategic.
We're just going to put the links up both to that changing the budget issue that we spoke about, and also the motion out of order issue that we spoke about. We could probably do a whole standalone webinar on motions out of order, I think, Frank, about the process, but also the strategy behind motions out of order. But we are running out of time and we really want to get to some of these questions, so let's rip into it. First up, Judy. Judy, thanks very much. In the situation where an AGM elected a chair and 6 committee members but didn't elect a secretary or treasurer, can the committee decide who the secretary and treasurer is? That's an incorrect process, Judy, isn't it, Frank?
Yeah, there's no such. You can't elect 6 committee members. For me, probably what that should have been is we got 4 ordinary members, and there's 2 people who don't have those spots, and so you'd say to them, "Do you want to be chair, treasurer, secretary, whatever it might be?" But yeah, so and I suppose you look at it, there's 7 people that want to be involved. Guys, pick which slot you want.
Yeah, that's it. Michelle, thank you. What do you do when the agenda comes out with the committee already elected and no opportunity to vote on members? Well, that's just plainly wrong, Michelle, that circumstance.
Unless, well, I suppose, because what you would have is you've got a bunch of, I'm assuming, maybe incorrectly, there's a bunch of people that are nominated. So we've got Chris nominated for chair, Frank nominated for treasurer. They're deemed elected unopposed. So you might then have 3 or 4
at the
other
meeting,
spots.
though. Yeah.
Oh, at the meeting, absolutely. Yeah. So that's only at the meeting.
But this question is about the agenda. Committee already elected. That doesn't happen, Michelle.
No.
It shouldn't be happening. Yeah.
No.
So what do? You have to go ahead and challenge that one, and all nominations not listed, just the existing committee already preset as elected. Remember our point from earlier, Michelle, that the committee stays in place right up until the very last motion on the agenda to elect a new committee. So it's still in place for the purposes of that AGM. Sam, thanks, Sam. You say an AGM is a chance to say something. Why can you not have your say at committee meetings? Ours won't let you talk or offer suggestions or disagreements or ask questions for more information. Do you want to take that one, Frank?
Yeah, sure. So this is now, you've got a statutory ability to force a committee to make decisions of up to 6 times in any 12-month period. So what we'll do is we'll put up the link to the webinar that we have done, so that we've done a couple on this, and we did one particularly from a lot owner's perspective in relation to engaging with committees. What's the best way to do that, how to do that, and all that sort of thing. If push comes to shove, like the reality is you can go to every committee meeting, provided you have 24 hours notice. That's there as an observer, not as a participant, unless you're invited. So that's absolutely the right thing. But if there are particular things you want done, or for the committee to make decisions, you can now put motions to them. And those motions must then be decided within, I think, a 6-week period, Chris, with the committee having the ability to extend for another 6 weeks, provided that it's reasonable to do so. And if the motion's not decided in that time, it's deemed to have been refused. So that's a trigger. So it's a question really for what your issue is and how hard you want to push it, and how important it is to you. But there's now more of a mechanism to engage with committees, but you're still never going to be able to make people talk to you personally.
And Sam, if you're talking about attending a committee meeting and not being allowed to speak at the committee meeting, that's actually enshrined in legislation. There are certain circumstances where the committee can absolutely restrict your involvement at the committee meeting. That's not something the committee can do anything about. Michelle, follow-up question. Is there any alternative to doing something about that AGM situation without a legal battle? No, there probably isn't, Michelle, if that's the situation you're facing. David, that's a good question. Thank you, David. In a layered scheme, who should have their AGM first, the principal or subsidiary?
I vote subsidiaries. Because to me, decision-making that goes on at a principal body corporate level needs to be decided potentially at a subsidiary level before the representative of the subsidiary can exercise their vote at principal level. If you know what I mean. So the subsidiary,
yeah.
or
I'd
have you got a
agree, Frank, because
countervailing view?
yeah, no, I actually agree with you. I
Oh,
think
right, good.
you're feeding up from the individuals
Yes.
up into the yeah. But would there ever be such a thing as who goes first once the layered schemes have been established? I mean,
we've helped a couple of layered schemes sort of refit themselves in a sense of what should happen from an order perspective, because you come back to the difficulty is that everybody corporates end of financial years back to when it first registered. So over time, if bodies corporates don't all register, you know, in consecutive periods, then you're going to have AGMs in August, September, February, April, whatever it might be. So they've all got to sort of tie back in. So you need to go and usually, to me, make your application to the Commissioner's Office to change the date of the end of financial year for your body corporate. And then from a PBC level, work backwards to say this is what the program needs to be and this is how the decision making should happen.
Well said, Frank. All right, we need to finish up, everybody. Again, as always, lots of chit chat on that one. Just a reminder that if you are new to the show, we live stream to YouTube and Facebook every Thursday at 2:00 Brisbane time. So to follow us on Facebook, go to the Heinz Legal page, hit the like button and icon. And for YouTube, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. We have run out of time. Thank you, everybody. Frank, thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everyone, for the feedback. Good questions.
Yeah, good questions. Keep them coming, everyone. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.